Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Now what I've got whizzing around in front of me today is one of the US Infantry from Marcher Empires at War, which is an alternate history war game. It's very World War II flavoured, I think you can tell from the fella that you see in front of you, but it has this funky, almost diesel punk kind of feel to it. Very cool game, and the miniatures themselves are fantastic. There's going to be a bunch of links for you to go and check stuff out. Now, this fella has had a little bit more work done to him than I would probably spend on an army of these guys. I haven't dry brushed the uniform or anything like that, for example. All of the highlights are done with an ordinary brush. And honestly, I think I would probably skip some of those if I was painting, like I said, an army. But this fella was so much fun to paint, and I wanted to take it just a little bit further. So all of the paints will be listed in the description, the same as always. Let's get started. So this fella I have printed myself. He has come off of an X1, and I will make sure that there are links in the description to where you can check out the STL catalog from Golden Dragon. There is also licensed printers around the world, so if you don't have a printer yourself, you're not going to miss out. Same too, the Americans I believe are coming to hard plastic relatively soon, so again, links in the description, check all that stuff out. I really like the design on these guys because they look just on the verge of sci-fi, I think is the way to put it. They are a little bit diesel punk, but kind of diesel punk plus, if that makes sense. Very obviously laser rifle inspired there, but the design on them is super cool. I love the armor look. Some folks have mentioned using these as proxies for 40k. Obviously, that would work relatively well, and the sculptors have made sure that there's an almost one-to-one for the weaponry in 40k, so you've got something else you can use these guys for. Looking at them, they might also make interesting veteran infantry in Conflict 47. The body armor obviously makes them a little bit tougher, so taking them as veterans, maybe just a thought. But all the same, once he is assembled, the first thing to do is to prime him. And no great surprise here, I've used Skeleton Bone from the Army Painter. Now, depending on what kind of color scheme you want to go for a lot of your American stuff, that's going to be pretty much the majority color. This chap, I am going to mix things up a little bit, but any bone color, even white or a light gray will work if you don't mind putting in a little bit of extra work popping one or two colors on. So as with most human miniatures, we're going to start with his skin. Now this fella here, I'm using Agate skin as the base coat, and it will cover relatively well over our skeleton bone. All the same, once this is dried, I'm going to come back and give it a second coat just to make sure it's a nice solid color. You'll see I've already hit the armor there, and this is part of the reason why we're doing the head first, because obviously the lowest level stuff, it's going to be harder to come back and reach and tidy up his face if we make any mistakes on that. But armor and what have you, it doesn't matter. We can tidy as we go with our next layers. Now the next layer up, we're going to do his trousers here, and this color is literally called Olive Drab. What I wanted, looking at the sort of National Guard look, was a green that was going to be vivid, but a little bit pale. So these look like they might have been in storage for a while, faded slightly, or just never been replaced as this fella's gone out on exercise. This will cover quite well, but as with most of these, if you discover that a little bit of the primer is still showing through once you're finished, just let it dry and come back and give it a second coat. Now the whole 2 coats advice is going to be pretty much solid throughout, so I'm going to stop repeating that. I'm going to move now to Tomb King Tan. Now this is slightly darker and a little bit less yellow than Skeleton Bone is. Going on, you might not immediately see a big difference, but by the time we're finished, you will notice it. So I'm going to go maybe just a little bit more water on my brush there, and yeah, paint in all of his tunic. Now spinning him around, I am going to use here Paratrooper Tan to paint in the bedroll that's attached to his pack. Now you may find that some of your packs are not going to have a bedroll, and you don't even have to attach the pack at all if you don't want to, but I quite like the idea that they've got a little bit of extra gear on them. Of course, any color here will work, but what I'd suggest is that doing the bedroll now is going to be easier because we can just paint over the top of the straps with our leather color for the pack itself later. Then once that is dried, we can start painting in his leather equipment. Now I'm going to use a couple of different browns from the Ruddy Brown set. This here is Dryad Brown. It's the lightest of the three I'm going to be using. And I'm going to carefully apply this over the pack. Now, with the benefit of hindsight, I might have done that in slightly the wrong order. It may have been easier to paint his armor first and then paint the equipment over that. But hey ho, let's paint in his armor now, and hope I haven't made that too taxing on myself. What I'm going to use here, this is Dark Olive, and this is one from the USA historical set from the Army Painter. And they are available individually from the Army Painter. If you want to find something which is kind of close to it, maybe just a fraction more brown, then USA Olive Drab from Vallejo is probably the closest there is. This is very much like good old Carrot on Granite, if you remember that one. Ooh boy. But as you can see, around stuff that I want to have an easier time of highlighting later, turning those white, I'm taking my time, but for most of this fella, it's not too difficult to reach those points. So I'm going to paint in his armor. Let's see what we get. Okay, yes, 300% it would have been easier to do the armor first. So I'm going to cruise back around and tidy up the webbing that I had already painted. Now, having mentioned a couple of different browns, I'm going to go down to Tree Ancient to paint in the strap on his rifle. This is going to be a fair bit easier. Now, it's worth pointing out, of course, you don't need to change up every single color on the browns and the leather and what have you. You could do all this in essentially the same color. I just have these paints, and it seems silly to not use them. And then finally for the browns, what I have is Oak Brown, and I'm going to use this to paint in his gloves and boots. And like I said, I just want to stress it one more time. If there is a brown that you like, you want to stick to one color for all three areas, go for it. I'm just trying to color match an illustration as close as I can, so I want to fuss with this a little bit more. What I've got is some fresh skeleton bone out of the pot, and I'm going to use this to tidy up his gaiters. Any bits where either the primer didn't quite take properly, or I've splurged on over with some green. Let's get that out of the way. Now for his rifle, I'm actually going to use Rifle Brown. This is another one from the historical range from the Army Painter. It is a very close match to, what is it, Flat Brown from Vallejo. Maybe just a little bit lighter. It's a really great color for that, Garin sort of wood. I'm going over most of the rifle here. If I hit the metallic stuff, it's not going to matter, and it will probably actually make it a little easier to base coat. Now, for the metal on his gun, I'm going to use, unsurprisingly, gun metal. This one here, you can use any middling silver that you like, but as well as the weapon itself. I'm going to swap to a smaller brush to do things like the outline of his buckle, these little grips and what have you. I would suggest that on bulk infantry in an army, I probably wouldn't bother with those steps. But because I am enjoying painting this guy, I'm going to do it on him. And it's good practice if you just want to have a look at how I might do it on, say, an officer. Now the grenade lurking back here, I'm going to hit with some Woodland Camo. Get a little bit of that onto my brush, and away we go. Now I'm going to use just a little bit of black for the black bits, and white for the white bits. This is not too terribly difficult. Now once you finish with this stage, you can go ahead and grab your base coats. Just do a quick whip round, make sure that there's nothing which you need to tidy up. And then we'll be ready for our wash. Now to wash him, what I've mixed up, this is 1 part each of strong tone and soft tone, and then 2 parts of Speedpaint Medium. So basically, whatever you mix up in the tones, the washes, you ought to add the same again in the medium, so it's nice and thin. Now you could just use straight strong tone, but the soft tone is going to give us a little bit of warmth, which I think is going to be quite handy, given some of the colors we're using. So I'm going to apply this over the entire miniature. This one mix is going to work for everything. Now, old hands are going to recognize that this actually looks quite similar to Ali's brown liquid. But since Citadel went along and changed the formulation for Seraphim Sepia, it's much, much more yellow, and it doesn't quite work in the same way that it used to make up that mix. So the closest color match I've found is what I'm using here. Just one to note if you have ever run out or you want more of it. But yeah, over everything with this mix, and we'll give them about half an hour to dry and see what we have then. And once that has dried, you'll have something that looks like this. Winner, winner. Now, I always really like how these come out. Just a quick matte varnish, you could probably chuck them on the table and be happy. But let's keep going. I enjoy painting past this stage, so what I'm going to start with is some barbarian flesh to paint in his skin. Let's get him in a shot here. What I want to do with this is cover over most of his face, but leave some of the shaded stuff in the recesses to help sell the shape of the face. So cheekbones, most of his cheeks, but leave a little bit of the hollow behind. Another thing to try and avoid, if you can, is his bottom lip. And once you've covered over most of his face in barbarian flesh, what we'll turn to is ruby skin. And I'm going to use this to highlight just extreme points on the face. So the tip of his nose, his chin, and his cheekbones with this as well. This is going to be way easier to do if you don't have a camera in front of you. Now you can take that higher, pick another lighter skin tone. Dorado skin's normally quite good as like a final glaze highlight in some places, but you're then likely going to want to knock it back with a thinned out flesh wash, start making work for yourself. So up to you if you take it that far. What I have here is ancient stone, and I'm going to start painting in just a few lines to accentuate the shape of the tunic, particularly at the corners of his pockets and what have you. Is a good spot for this. Now doing the same thing again, I have necrotic flesh, and I'm going to paint over his trousers. Now a skill to practice is in how much you thin down your highlights, because you can find that using a highlight color essentially straight from the pot will get you a very harsh, very, very bludgy sort of highlight. Instead, if you thin them down, what you can do is pop a little bit over your, where you want to highlight, let it dry, see what it looks like, and then if you want to, you can come back with slightly more and sharpen it up a little further. Takes a bit of practice, but it is one of those skills which will serve you well. Now over his gloves, I'm going to go to Dryad Brown again, and just pop a little bit of this in at his knuckles to give this a bit of extra shape. Now for both of the other leather colors, so his equipment and his rifle strap, what I have here is fur brown. And I'm going to do the same thing again of thinning that down a little bit more than I usually would to see how it settles, and then add some more if I fancy. But I think this is going to be plenty. Okay, now the last thing to do is to highlight the metal, but before I do that, what I'm going to do is to go outside and hit him with a matte varnish spray. The reason being is if I highlight him now and then varnish him, it's going to dull down those metallic highlights just a little, not a huge amount, but enough that it will be noticeable, so it's going to look more interesting to varnish the miniature, bring that shine off of the figure, and then highlight the metal. So, there is our varnish. Magic stuff, right? Remember that varnishing is not just about protecting your miniature, it's also changing up the finish. So very useful to have that to hand, even if you don't think you need it. The final highlight is going to be with some plate mail metal, and I'm going to do the same as before, add just a little bit of water to this, and what I want to make sure is that I have very little of this on the edge of my brush when I'm ready. Now a brush that holds a tip is important here, because what I'm going to do is very carefully drag along the edges of some of the armor, and then little dotty scratches, so that there's not a single hard highlight, right? The idea here is that I want to try and replicate something that's been in the field for a little while, and has kind of naturally caught a few scratches, but nothing that's so intense it would get repainted. Now this can take a fair bit of doing. It is very easy to go overboard, so mind how you go. But particularly on rivets and things like that, it's nice and quick just to dot the tops of those in, because those would naturally catch, a bit of action. But yeah, I'm now going to cruise around and finish this off. Once I have done, what I'm going to do is base them, and the recipe for that will be in the description, the same as always. And so, there at last, our US Marcher Infantryman is complete, and I'm really happy with that end result. One thing that I do want to point out is that the buttons on his equipment, now I've deliberately not painted those in silver. I always kind of imagine them as being pop studs, which have a little bit of the leather over the top of them, because to my mind, it's a little less obvious on the battlefield. I know obviously we're not dealing with a real infantryman here, but it's one of those details where I think, yeah, it saves you a bit of time obviously. It's nice not having to paint buttons, but also it makes a bit more sense to me. Now the miniatures themselves are really cool, thoroughly enjoyed painting them, and the end result I'm quite happy with. So as always, thanks goes out to Exit 23 Games for the light and sound equipment, as well as all of my wonderful patrons who are keeping me ticking in paints and glue, which includes my most gorgeous producers who are showing up on screen now. Thank you very much for your support, folks. Now any questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the old comment box below. My Blue Sky and Instagram, they're both linked there too. So thank you for your time one and all, and you all enjoy the rest of your day.